Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Mike.
And this is No Limits, a Rapp podcast. So how you doing this week, Mike?
I'm good. It's practically summer. The humidity, the heat is coming out, almost midway through June. So we're there. We're there. The year's coming along. How about for you, Chris?
It's nice. I actually got to go back to work in person this week, slowly but surely, doing a little bit of limit capacity at my institution. But I still got this podcast and I get to hang out with you. So that's the light of my week.
And we get to hang out with Rapp.
Yes. Well, not Rapp this week, though.
That's right. That's right. Speaking about enjoying this podcast, we are grateful for our listeners. And for our Twitter roundup, we've mailed out a few No Limits stickers. We picked one winner who picked my favorite book cover of Transfer of Power, which was cover A, the classic one. And that was Linda H. You can find her on Twitter at LYNDANNE0567. And our other winner picked Chris's favorite cover, cover F, from our little Twitter contest. And that was Benjamin Thomas at pretty cool handle at Harvathians. He claims himself the founder of the unofficial Scott Harvath fan club.
Ooh, I got to join that fan club. I love me some Scott Harvath.
There's really good things out there right now about Near Dark, which comes out really soon. The next book, the follow-up to Backlash. And so Brad Thor is getting a lot of really great press right now. They're saying this might be one of his best.
Because I really enjoyed Backlash. That was a really good book.
Yeah, a lot of people online are saying get ready for this next one. It's going to be good.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're going to do the same Twitter sticker cover contest for the third option, which we will be reading and reviewing in the beginning of July. We also got, to highlight one more listener, we got a really nice email from Donald K. Donald told us he is excited to find the podcast. He just discovered Rapp, Flynn, and Mills, and is looking forward to making this a Rapp-filled summer as he reads and listens along with us on the podcast. So
sounds like a good summer.
Yeah, great summer. Thanks, Donald, for joining us in this adventure.
Thanks for listening.
What are we covering today, Chris, on the episode?
So on today's podcast, we're going to be doing something new, something I think we both enjoyed, but we're going to be breaking down two movies that we mentioned before. These two movies came out 3 months apart from each other in 2013, and those movies are Olympus Has Fallen, which was released in March of 2013, and White House Down, which was released in June of 2013. And these movies, they have, I don't know, we'll get into it, similar plots, and maybe heavily adapted from the Flynn book that we just covered, Transfer of Power. But yeah, we're going to discuss those movies, and I'm excited to talk about that with you.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go in with an open mind. I saw them when they came out, but, it's been quite a few years. So I want to think about them in two ways and try to separate these two things in my mind. First, I wanted to watch them as action films and try to review them on their own merits and see if they have any inherent artistic or storytelling value. But I also want to be very, very conscious of how they may have used or relied upon Vince Flynn's writing in Transfer of Power, rightfully so, or perhaps unfairly.
Right. We're going to get more into that in a second, but just when I first sat down to watch these, again, I wanted to be like you. We sort of set parameters where we're just going to first look at these as films. Like, how are they as films? And secondly, what sort of influence do they draw from Flynn? And how can we critique that? I thought, watching them, they were action movies, and they're very much so like my dad's film. Like, he loves that kind of stuff. They're enjoyable. It wasn't like I thought I wasted 2 hours of my life watching them, which I have watched really bad action films that I've felt like it's a waste. But with these, I enjoyed them. And actually, I remember watching Olympus Has Fallen and thinking, oh, I like that. And then when London Has Fallen, I think me and my dad actually went and saw that one in theaters together. I enjoyed that. While I haven't seen Angel Has Fallen, the third, and I think it came out late last year, it's now on Netflix, and I plan to watch that in the near future. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I remember enjoying them, having a good time, but I think there's some history, some conflicts going back to 2010, even when the first ideas of making a film about Rapp and the ideas of making a film like Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down were in the works.
Right. So, CBS Films pretty early on had a contract with Flynn to make a rap-centric movie, a Flynn rap movie. And so originally, I was doing my research and they had sort of signed on, or they had signed on for an adaptation of Consent to Kill, which is interesting because that is the sixth book in the Mitch Rapp series. And they actually had a script written for it, done by the same guy, Jonathan Lemkin, who had wrote Lethal Weapon 4 and Shooter. And they had chosen Antoine Fuqua to direct it, who is the ultimate director for Olympus Has Fallen, which is interesting. And then eventually that project was decided to be disbanded for whatever reasons. And then they ultimately decided CBS Films, to make American Assassin the origin story of Mitch Rapp. And that's the movie that they eventually went on to make. So what do you think about, first of all, the choice of initially doing Consent to Kill, and secondly, the choice to abandon that and then go to American Assassin?
I mean, I still long to see all of these as movies, and
Oh yeah,
Consent to Kill would be on towards the top of my list.
definitely. Great book. Great book.
I just don't know, and we don't want to spoil too much of later plots in the Rapp
Right.
series in case there are any new listeners, but it is too heavy of a plot to start with, where why Consent to Kill stays on your heart and your mind is because it has a major, major impact on Rapp's life and the people around him. And it will have a major impact on his family life as he's getting older. And so, amazing book, but do you really want to start there to introduce a film? I'm not so sure. You mentioned they thought of American Assassin. It turns out in 2010 is right when Vince was writing American Assassin.
I don't know. Everyone loves an origin story, right? But you do have to land that origin story in order to make a good franchise. I feel like all these studios, and this is a problem with a lot of different movies and franchise movies, where they have it in their head, oh my God, this is great IP. We have the potential to make 5, 10, 15 films if we wanted to. Look, think of the money. But if they don't land that origin story, they've lost the opportunity, right? And so I could see where they would want to pick Consent to Kill. Like, it's such a great book. It would lend a great story like that. That story in and of itself is good. But when you're thinking about, oh, how do we develop this film franchise, it makes more sense to do American Assassin.
And we're gonna talk American Assassin, hopefully review the film when we work on the book later down the road in this podcast, going publication order. But the reason we bring it up is there's an important intersection here with how those films being
Right.
discussed back in 2010 relate to Olympus Has Fallen coming out and White House Down coming out 3 years later. And the key is Gerard Butler.
Yep.
He was not only a fan favorite to play Mitch Rapp in any future film, but Vince Flynn also endorsed him and said, yeah, I think he'd be the best fit. And as we know, Gerard Butler comes out doing Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of follow up on that. When you think of Mitch Rapp, like an older Mitch Rapp, who's your ideal Mitch Rapp?
All the names that were thrown around sounded great. Both Hemsworths were discussed.
Yeah, I would have liked to see Liam Hemsworth play the American Assassin Vince Flynn. The American Assassin Mitch Rapp, but we can talk about that when we watch the movie.
He would have been great, but there was, I believe, a social media push to get fans involved in who they would think is a good fit. And one of the top choices was also Eric Bana, who I think would have been pretty good. Thinking about Troy, I think he was Hector, right?
Right.
I think that would have been a great fit.
He's been in a bunch of like war movies.
Yep. And Matt Damon apparently came up on the list. Mark Wahlberg was a close fourth. So
I'm glad not Mark Wahlberg.
I think you would have to have size. You'd have to have tone, like skin tone. And you just have to have that X factor, the badass factor, right? All those people we just named, I think, would fit that. And we'll talk about ending with how we get Dylan O'Brien later on when we get to American Assassin.
Right. Apparently Vince Flynn had gotten, we're not the only ones to conclude that these two stories are very closely similar to his book Transfer of Power. In 2013, he made some comments. He released these two statements in an address to fans. He says, "My team and I have noticed the similarities as well and know of a second movie coming out this summer Neither of these movies are Mitch Rapp movies, nor do I have any involvement in either project. It's difficult to prove where a producer, director, or screenwriter gets an idea, or to prove how their ideas may have been inspired. It's exceptionally difficult to prove this in court, and the costs a lot of time, money, and usually amounts to a great deal of frustration. My team and I have decided to stay focused on a Rapp franchise, writing one great Rapp novel a year and getting the American Assassin movie made. So he acknowledges it, probably not happy about it. Like he says, it's really hard to prove where someone gets their inspiration for something.
Yeah, I think that letter is an important testament to Vince's character as well, because sadly, I believe this was written just a few months before his passing, and so he must have been struggling. And for him to just say, I'm going to, till my very last minute, focus on writing the next, I think he says, kick-ass Rapp novel. I'm not going to go down fighting this in court, bringing out the lawyers. And as hard as it must have been to see his ideas turned into this big Hollywood, groundbreaking movie, 2 movies that would come out. I believe he died before White House Down came out. It must have been hard, but he said, I'm just committed to you guys, the fans, and I'm going to stick to writing these books.
The two studios were competing with each other at the same time to fill these roles. Obviously, these are 2 movies that are very similar with each other, so everyone in the room has an idea of, who we want to play certain characters, and in times they were really fighting to get the director, a couple of the actors that were associated with each side. And so it's really interesting that the studios chose to put these 3 months apart from each other. Actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe White House Down was actually pushed up to be closer to Olympus Has Fallen once they found out that Olympus Has Fallen was coming out.
Yeah, so we just hope to, on everything in this podcast, do justice to Vince Flynn's work. Yeah. And I think we're going to ultimately agree. We wish these movies could have been a little bit more appreciative, or perhaps directly dedicating some of the things they borrowed to him. And, it's just more salt in the wounds that you mentioned before. The director, Antoine Fuqua, was slated to do a Rapp movie as early as 2010 and eventually didn't finalize that, and instead went off and did Olympus Has Fallen. So, it is what it is. But our hope, at least, is to justify the great work the transfer of power is, but also let's have an honest discussion around these 2 movies, what they do and they don't do well.
Definitely. So how about we get into our first film, starting with the one that came out first, and the one that I think is objectively better, Olympus Has Fallen. On Rotten Tomatoes, which, take Rotten Tomatoes with a grain of salt, Olympus Has Fallen has a 49% score from the critics, which I guess
tomato meter.
Yeah, tomato meter, there it is. And a 66% from the audience. So while the critics were pretty much split on the movie, the audience seemed to generally like it. This film was made by Millennium Film Studios, and it was distributed by the Film District. And as we mentioned before, the director was Antoine Fuqua, who has also done some really good movies. Training Day, Tears of the Sun, Shooter, and Equalizer. And in Shooter and Equalizer, you can kind of see like how he likes to do his, and I guess Tears of the Sun too, because that's a lot of war and action. But he does really good action movies. I would,
and he works with big names. I mean, Equalizer, you have Denzel Washington,
right, and Marky Wahlberg and Bruce Willis, and
he's definitely prepared for to take on, if he did a Rapp movie, but he was also prepared for this one as well.
Right. So let me just give you the summary from IMDb. So, in the aftermath of a tragic accident involving President and the First Lady, who are played by Aaron Eckhart and Ashley Judd, Secret Service agent Mike Banning, played by Gerard Butler, is handed his walking papers. When a powerful terrorist group seizes command of the White House and takes the president hostage, the entire nation watches as the Speaker of the House, played by Morgan Freeman, becomes the acting president and plans his response. Meanwhile, Banning finds himself trapped in the White House as it comes under siege from all sides. With no choice but to fight back against the heavily armed invaders, Banning must rely on his extensive knowledge of the building to rescue the president and prevent the situation from spiraling into all-out war.
What were your first impressions, Chris, once you finished watching this?
As a whole, I liked the film. I thought the action was pretty well done. when comparing it to the second film we're going to do, White House Down, this movie was way less cheesy in its one-liners, and I feel like there was a little bit of comedy at some points, but it wasn't like over the top comedy that White House Down seemed to have. It was just tonally like a different movie. It was way more. This is an action movie, and while I had some qualms with the CGI and the plot, we'll talk about that. As a whole, I thought it was a nice, pretty well done film. It's not an Oscar, not an Oscar-winning award film, but
No,
you know, for what it was, it was entertaining.
I'm with you. I took it as an entertaining ride, a good action movie, and it was kind of cool. I mean, the attack on the White House, it's kind of cool. It's this full-on barrage. I mean, we're talking AC-130 gunship coming in from the sky. We're talking RPGs and bazookas being aimed at the front door. Two fully loaded, I believe it was trash or recycling trucks
Yeah,
that just implode so that they sink 3 feet into the ground and are immovable, and an onslaught of North Koreans attacking the White House literally through the front door. From the north side, they just bust the fence and walk right in and mow down the countless, I would say dozens of Secret Service agents just coming out the front door. And that's after wreaking havoc on the National Mall with the gunship just spraying down civilians to create chaos. And so, some action scenes, they were just entertaining. Definitely, I want to get into some things that we thought maybe didn't work. But just to wrap up what I did enjoy, I like the ending too. I talked about on our Transfer of Power review how the book left me wanting a little bit with this rushed ending and this rushed conclusion. It was really cool to watch Bannon, the Secret Service agent, go toe to toe with the terrorist. We actually saw the fight. We never really get to see Rapp and Aziz going hand to hand. Rapp ends up getting the upper hand, but it's in an epilogue. So it's kind of cool to watch Bannon have to go toe to toe with the main villain. He carried the wounding president out, getting him through the hall. We're seeing the remains of the White House completely burned out. So I like the ending. I like the entertainment. And let's just talk the casting. You had a
yeah.
great supporting cast here. I mean, Morgan Freeman, Speaker of the House, ultimately assuming the commander in chief position. You can't beat him.
No, not at all. I thought that was a great choice. You have Aaron Eckhart as the president.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Ashley Judd is his wife. She's only in the film for like 8 minutes, but she's a great actress.
The director of Secret Service was that
Oh,
Angela
Angela
Bassett?
Angela
Angela
Bassett.
Bassett. She crushed. She held her own. She was basically in Transfer of Power. You have the Joint Chiefs. You have the chairman
Right.
of the Joint Chiefs, and you have the head of the CIA, Stansfield, as the main two voices in the commander in chief's ear. Well, you had here Angela Bassett as the Secret Service director, one of the main voices, and she was just great. She held her own.
So one of the podcasts that I regularly listen to is the Rewatchables, which they do something like this every week where they rewatch a movie and then talk about it. And I don't know if you've ever listened to that podcast, but they have awards that they put out for each movie. And one of the ones I like is they have this Dion Waiters Award. He's a basketball player, and if you didn't know that, Mike, uh,
Nope.
and essentially it's an award that is distinguishing someone who is thinks that they're the best guy in the room or the best guy on the team or the best guy in the movie here in this case, but actually they're like the fifth, fourth, sixth, riding the bench
Mm.
player. And so in this movie, I really thought that Dylan McDermott was way overacting. To me, he gets the Dion Waiters Award. Like everyone else, their acting was it was spot on for what that position should be. But the rogue Secret Service agent who ends up helping them get in, his acting and his mannerisms were just, to me, were way overacting.
Yeah, I didn't buy his character as this dejected Secret Service agent willing to sell out his country.
Yeah.
So I think I'm with you on that. And one other positive actor to shout out, Kang. I forget
Yes.
who the actor was, but Kang, who plays the Korean terrorist, he nailed that role.
Rick Yoon.
Rick Yoon really nailed that role. Yeah. So talking about, I think Forbes was his name, this Secret Service agent who,
Forbes.
gets in bed with the North Koreans and ultimately helps mastermind the attack of taking down the White House. I didn't buy his acting. I also just didn't buy his character. I mean, he has these two lines when he's explaining to Banning why he sold out and did this. He's like, how much does it cost to buy a presidency? You sold this country out. Or no, he's talking to
The
Aaron
president.
Eckhart when he's chained up in the Peoc in the bunker. And they completely just narrow the story down to he's disgruntled because money in politics, and he thinks the current president sold out this country, blah, blah, blah. That's just a cheap device to make the White House takedown seem more realistic. Like,
Yeah.
how would this group of terrorists have been able to do this? Oh, we need somebody on the inside. So let's just randomly make up a guy who's sick of the money in politics and doesn't like the current administration. I gotta give credit to Vince Flynn and every other writer who respects law enforcement, because while he plays within the book transfer power and even term limits, what happens when parts of our own government turn
Right.
bad, he never has those law enforcement or military figures be the ultimate evil bad guy, the enemy. They never sell out. Like Scott Coleman in Term Limits, right?
He is the assassin.
He's the assassin, and you want to like him because he's making good argument of why he's doing this. But Vince never says he's doing it just because he's a bad guy. He's always doing it because he honestly deep down believes what he's doing is best for America. He's always a true patriot. And both of these movies, they make a Secret Service agent the scapegoat. In White House Down, we're going to find out it's the director of the presidential detail. And here it's just some random fed up agent. They quickly turn very easily and become the bad guy. I feel like that doesn't do justice to why so many people get into and want to be on the presidential detail. They don't turn that easy. And so I thought it was a cheap device just to say, we need some reason the terrorists were able to do this.
Right.
And so they made up that character.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Something else didn't land. Just the terrorist group as a whole. To pick North Korea, I don't know if I bought into it. You know, they tried to force this line of this guy Kang is a North Korean defector who has a child, was snuck across the DMZ and grew up his whole life in South Korea, but was still so, well, I mean, what was he? How old was he when he crossed the border that he's that radicalized?
Who would have thought that they would have penetrated the South Korean government, right?
Oh, yeah. And they're like, he's one of the most wanted terrorists in the world. Yet
no one has
a picture of him.
Yeah.
So how do you know he's one of the most wanted terrorists if you literally don't have any information on him? But then he comes up in your database. And they even match a picture. They're like, oh, that's Kang. And you're like, wait, you just told me you don't know who Kang is.
Right.
But he's the most wanted terrorist on your list. Didn't buy it.
No. Also, the whole Cerberus plotline and the fact that they were after this Cerberus thing was very confusing. And the idea that there are 3 codes given to the president and 2 other top officials in his cabinet that are completely walled off from anywhere else. They, like, once they're set, they can't be changed. Like, that would never happen, right? And the fact that they're like, what was it, 8-digit codes that were just a string of numbers and symbols and letters, like, and that she's able to hack it.
Yeah, and better yet, I mean, I guess it's supposed to, the idea is the movie's trying to tell us it's a defense mechanism. If we accidentally launch a nuke and then intel changes and we need to make a last minute abort, there's no way to do that. So Cerberus is a program to explode the missile where it is. So if it's in the air, it's in the air, or, or before it crashes, explode it so it does less damage. But what the terrorists plan to do is get these 3 codes, which you're right, are ridiculous the way they're set up. I mean, the nuclear football, am I right, also has all these safeguards and mechanisms so you can accidentally activate it, such as once the codes are put in, it still takes another level of a general to push the button or give the there's no button up, but to give the final command. It's not with the president's command. I believe there's a second step.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the next movie.
Yeah, forget everything about the nuclear football because we just have the Cerberus we could do instead, which all you need is these codes. And then when they get the 2 codes, they just run a computer program to guess the 3rd code. What's the point of the 3rd code if you're just going to have a computer program randomly scroll through all combinations and, oh, bing, we got the president's code? Like, if you could just get the president's code with software, what's the whole point of this system?
Yeah, why can't you get, like, why couldn't you just run it for all of them? Yeah, that whole part just didn't make any sense. Gmail has a better system than that. If someone tries to
authentication.
if someone tries to log in China, I get an email saying, "Did you attempt this many logins?" And it says, "We're going to shut down your account." Like, that's my Gmail. There's nothing that important in my Gmail, let alone a freaking something that would potentially explode all of our nuclear arsenal.
It's super dramatic in the moment. You're like, are they going to get the codes? I was kind of like, oh my God. So once again, you're making a movie, but here's the thing. It might be a good movie doing that, but it can't be a great movie
Yeah,
unless it also checks out when the suspense is over. If it leaves you thinking and wondering and like, oh my goodness, could it happen? Then it maybe is approaching great movie. This one is enjoyable in the action, so it is good movie. But when the suspense is over, you're not left with anything deeper to chew on. You're not left
right.
with, oh my God, I can't believe. Can you imagine if
I
you
think a
don't
good
have that
example of
level?
that is like the Sum of All Fears, like Tom Clancy,
Mm-hmm.
where they actually have like a nuclear detonation on US soil, I think like in Baltimore somewhere, right? When something like that happens
Yep.
and you think, holy shit, like this this gonna actually happen, the Cerberus thing is not never gonna happen.
No. Another thing that didn't work with me, their demands or their first set of demands is basically remove I believe it's the Seventh Fleet from the Sea of Japan, and then also pull out all the 35,000 American troops at the DMZ. I feel like that would have been enough of what these terrorists would have wanted.
Yeah.
A Middle Eastern radicalized terror group would have wanted the next step of destroying America and setting these nukes off domestically to cause chaos to, the great Satan. I don't feel this group of terrorists would have wanted or had motivation for that. Their motivation was to reunite the peninsula, to bring the Koreas together. And I guess they would be against what they would see as American imperialism going back to the 1950s and, the agreement at the 38th parallel. But this particular terrorist group from this region didn't seem to me have a good enough motivation to want to then also let's blow up nukes across America. It was kind of like an added thing just to make it
Let's throw this in to make
suspenseful.
it over the top. Yeah.
Yep.
Also,
Can
you're gonna nerd out on the geography for us here in a second, right?
I was just gonna say, can you please give me these 1.5 minutes to nerd out here?
Yeah, please do.
So thinking good and great movie again is your attention to detail. The same way with Vince Flynn, his attention to the military aspects or the law enforcement aspects or the government protocols, he nails it. This movie had a few moments where I was ready to break my TV. So there's a newscast going on in the background, and it's trying to fill in the audience about the situation is at the White House. And the headline reads, Southeast Asia on brink of war. And they continue talking about talks in Pyongyang and the government of Korea is on high alert. And I almost lose it. Southeast Asia? Southeast Asia? I teach 11 and 12-year-olds geography, and we clearly define Southeast Asia, and it's nowhere near when we study East Asia and the Korean Peninsula. I mean, we're talking about the North Korean border being in northeastern China, practically near Russia,
Yeah,
on the
it's
same
way more cold there than it is than
such a northern latitude, and they're saying Southeast Asia on the brink of war. They couldn't even get the basic geography right, and so a little thing like that showing up in the background on a newscast is enough for me to lose it. And then, not to mention, the Koreans demand the Seventh Fleet be removed from the Sea of Japan. Chris, they wouldn't call it the Sea of Japan. It's
yeah,
it's
no,
been
they
a
wouldn't.
long-standing debate. Koreans are hardline north and south, referring it to as the East Sea or the Korean East Sea. So for a North Korean terrorist who so loves his cause and his country, to call it the Sea of Japan is inherently contradictory. So even the naming conventions and the basic geography of where this is, you gotta nail that, Chris. You got to. Is it just me?
But that's the difference between a good movie and a great movie, right?
Yep.
Like great
Yep.
movies think about all of the minutia, the small details.
Yep.
Like they would have had someone comb that to make sure that they
Yep.
were saying that this character who's from this position
Would
obviously
have this
is
perspective.
would have this perspective and be calling it that. And so yeah, while you're right, not many people are picking up on those things. But again, you obviously did. It's important to you. So there's other geography teachers out there.
It's the same as great literature, right? We said in one of the early episodes of this podcast, you miss a basic fact about a weapon, or you misinterpret, something about the rank in the military, and all of a sudden, or you were referring to Skip McMahon being referred to as special agent.
And
You
not just
miss
agent.
those,
Yep.
not just agent. You miss those things in your writing and your research. You're going to turn off a certain portion of the audience. And in this case, I think it could be a sizable portion of an international market for the film, particularly in East Asia, that I think you miss out on with mistakes like that.
Right.
I'll get off my high horse. Can we wrap up with how you felt this movie related to transfer of power? How did this movie include elements from transfer of power? Do you believe it went so far as to rip off transfer of power, or did it do enough to blaze its own path and be its own film?
As a whole, I think I lean more on the edge that this film ripped off Transfer of Power more than White House Down, because when we look at the movie, it's literally the president is kidnapped by a terrorist organization. The president is then taken to the bunker. There is a difference in the fact that the terrorists are actually in the bunker in this movie, and there's subtle differences that they chose to change from Flynn's novel to this movie. But ultimately, the president's in a bunker. Then one man has to go in who knows the building really well or is trained in the background. Obviously he's a Secret Service agent, doesn't work for the CIA thing. But I think that is just, it is the utter outlining of what transfer power is. Like that, I just thought that this movie was way more influenced than you did.
You're right. I do agree that there were some ripoffs here, and a couple of moments it really got under my skin.
Definitely.
So,
like, well, I don't know, thinking like of someone going through an air vent, putting the kid through the air vent. Yep.
So putting the kid in the air vent is one thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, it looks like they kind of borrowed that. And then I'm like, wait, do not make that air vent lead to a bush. Don't make it on the south lawn, and you push aside the shrub, and there's the duct to the exit to the vent, please. And then all of a sudden, cutscene, a couple of agents coming in, pulling up a bush, and there it is, a duct on the lawn. I'm like, oh, they did it. Same thing with the drilling, right? I was like, oh, they're in the bunker and the terrorists are in there, so they won't have to have somebody drilling at the door. And then cutscene, and we see a group of the terrorists with a drill drilling into thick concrete walls. I'm like, oh, they're doing that too.
Right. And then when they bring out the Secretary of Defense, played by Melissa Leo, to put her out there and shoot, and then it totally mimics when in Transfer of Power, Aziz brings out the NSA and does actually shoot him. That to me was, a ripoff, but at the same time changing it a little bit because, she gets saved. But in every case, there was subtle hints to like, oh, how do we do this? How do we steal from this text? At least that's how I felt. How do we steal from this text? But let's tweak it. Kind of back in grade school when you were plagiarizing from a friend and you were like, oh, I can't say exactly, so I'm going to write the sentence and then how can I doctor it up to make it different but the same?
Trust me, Chris, they still do it in middle school, and they still do it in high school.
You probably see them a lot.
Chris, I've even had parents tell me, what do you mean that's not plagiarism? I told them to change a few words, and I just, oh my God.
Yeah, let's write it, copy it, change a few words, you're good. That's exactly what this movie felt like to me. And you actually brought to me a line that actually Banning says that it was very similar to what Rapp says in Transfer Power. You want to share that?
So this was one of the top moments where I too was like, they stole the book. You have Banning, who is a super secret service kind of agent, but as far as we know, he doesn't have much international experience. They say he was an Army Ranger. I don't even recall them saying he was in Delta Force, and they
just say Ranger. Yeah,
they just say Ranger, and they certainly don't even tell us he's been on very high-profile missions during his service. We don't get that yet. I think he specifically says, you can't give this guy what he wants. I've dealt with these types of men before.
What men have you dealt with before, like in a hostage situation?
Yeah, we don't know that he has.
Yeah, we don't.
Where with Rapp, we had the Farah Harut scene, and we knew Rapp had history catching these guys in the Middle East. We knew that Rapp dealt with Aziz. It was built up for us that he has personal history. And it ultimately turns out, Aziz was involved in the Lockerbie bombing. So we are given so much more backstory, yet they just decide to borrow the line of Banning saying, I've dealt with these types of men. You're a Secret Service agent. Like, we never heard how or when you did. I think that line was just straight up stolen.
Yep, I agree.
And I'm not going to go easy on him. You're right. The big theft was the star, Gerard Butler, Anton Fuqua. Yeah. Obviously, they had the chops to do this kind of movie, and they were in talks to do it as a Rapp movie, which ultimately down the road would have led to Transfer of Power being made, I believe. And so they jump ship, and so that was one of the ultimate letdowns of Olympus Has Fallen.
Honestly, instead of getting this movie, I would have preferred the Gerard Butler Consent to Kill movie. Uh,
Oh,
uh,
you give me a Fuqua directed, Gerard Butler starring Consent to Kill movie, nailed it. Instead of this, let White House Down flop, a few months from now.
yeah,
If
who
instead
cares?
those two did Consent to Kill, heck, if they did American Assassin, rolled it out a few years early. I know it was just written in 2010, 2011, but much would have preferred that.
Yeah. Let's change gears here a little bit and focus on our second movie, which is White House Down. Came out 3 months after Olympus Has Fallen. So this movie on Rotten Tomatoes had a little bit better critic score, which I thought was hilarious. Not much better. 2 points, 51%, and the audience liked it less with 62%. But pretty much even, I would say. It was directed by Roland Emmerich, who also directed some of my favorite movies. Independence Day, love that movie. The Patriot, great movie.
Legendary.
The Day After Tomorrow,
Not legendary.
but a great movie.
It's good.
2012, entertaining. And his most recent movie was Midway, which I haven't seen, but I've wanted to see. Definitely not The Patriot. In White
No.
House Down. But this movie was released by a little bit bigger studio and done by Columbia Pictures, and it was released by Sony's distribution wing. And so, just to read the IMDb summary, we have dejected after being turned down for a position with the Secret Service, but unable to break the news to his adoring daughter, Capitol Policeman John Cale, played by Channing Tatum, is taking her on a tour of the White House when a powerful explosion rips through the building, sparking mass chaos. When the smoke clears, Cale learns that heavily armed rebels have taken both his daughter, played by Joey King, and the president, played by Jamie Foxx, as a hostage. As news of the attack creates mass panic and fear of total collapse, Cale realizes that the fate of his daughter and the entire rest of the nation rests in his willingness to fight back against the terrorists who have brought the most powerful nation on the planet to its knees. So, Mike, what were your first impressions of this?
I didn't enjoy it as much as Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was as good a movie. I don't think either of them are great, but I don't think it was as good of a movie. And the CGI and graphics were certainly worse.
Oh, and the cheesy one-off liners really killed me, man.
So that's the other thing. I was so turned off by this movie and the cheesy jokes and the dumb laughs. And I'm like, I thought this was the White House being taken by terrorists. Like Transfer of Power, I rarely thought of laughing reading that book.
Oh yeah, no comedy at all.
But you got to move the goalpost. Halfway through the movie, I kind of just was like, you know what? They're going for a family film. Yes, there's blood, guts, and gore, but they're kind of just going for a nice afternoon. The kids can watch it with you. And once I realized that, I was like, you know what? I'll appreciate some of these jokes a little more. Once I learned to appreciate some of those jokes, I got over the cheesiness of it and thought of it as a family movie, and I had more fun with it.
No, I would agree with you. Like, I guess going into this, I was sort of geared towards finding comparisons with Transfer of Power. And like you said, Transfer of Power was very much no comic relief, really. And I mean, most of Flynn's writing doesn't really have comic relief. And I'm okay with that. But, and I guess I'm also okay with having comic relief in some action films. At times it's funny, but in this case, there was a lot of it, and a lot of it was really cheesy. I guess so let's just dive into some of the things that we did like about this movie.
Well, it goes hand in hand with the comedy. Is it made Jamie Foxx better because obviously he's a legend, right?
Right.
He's done so much, but starting this movie, he wasn't doing it for me. He was giving these speeches, trying to be presidential. He was
out of character.
On the news. He wasn't really fitting his style. But once you brought in the comedy of it and you brought in the action, Jamie Foxx just comes around. I mean, there's a scene where they're climbing the elevator shaft, right? They make it to the residence. And he's like, shoes. I need some shoes. He's about to grab the dress shoes. And instead, it looks like he grabs the Jordans.
He ends up, one of the terrorists grabs his shoes after he killed him, thought he killed him. And he's like, hands off my Jordans. Like when you don't think about this movie as an action film or in the context of Transfer of Power, that some of these things are hilarious and they're funny. but and definitely Jamie Foxx shines in that laughter. I also like the scene where he's obviously tense. He opens up his drawer to find a sat phone, and it's just covered in Nicorette gum.
Yes.
And then he grabs some and offers it to Kale, and is like throws two pieces in. He's smacking the gum. He's like, "Do you smoke?" He's like, "Neither do I."
Yeah, at first I was like, I thought this was going to be a super serious movie. I don't want to hear all these jokes. And then I learned to appreciate them. And
Another thing that I thought worked that I really liked was Kale's daughter, and specifically like the acting by Joey King, who has gone on to do some good stuff. I recently saw her in The Act, which is a dramatization actually of like the HBO special "Mommy, Dead, and Dearest" about Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Highly recommend it if you haven't watched that Netflix series. But she was really good as Kale's daughter. I really thought she had great acting. What did you think about her, Mike?
yeah, she was lights out acting. I'd go so far as to say the best performance in the movie. I mean, obviously not an award-winning movie, but I think she could have gotten something. And for what it looks like, she's a teenager or a preteen. She phenomenal acting in that movie, and her character as well is just this very strong-willed kid. She plays really well these like teen drama problems of wanting
Yeah,
to ignore
she's
her
very
dad and put the
dorky,
headphones on.
quirky.
She's
Yeah,
dorky at the same time. When she's getting a tour from this equally sassy tour guide, he's asking all these questions, and she's hand shoots up. She's answering all of them. She just played all those roles: the drama roles, the comedy roles, the dorky teenager role to a T.
right. One other thing I think we both agreed on that we liked from this film was the helicopter scene where they've developed this plan outside of the Secret Service, and they're trying to take back the White House, and they fly through the the streets, very low formation. They fly actually under, I think, the Key Bridge. And I don't know, I like the scene mainly because of, again, this whole nostalgia factor, and I enjoyed that scene. I also thought that was really cool. And the speed camera clicks them. I hate those speed cameras.
So I gotta admit, I appreciate the helicopters because from the very opening scene, they make that part of this movie's thing. They actually have a joke.
Yeah,
The president wants to do the thing, and Maggie
that was
Gyllenhaal of the
cool.
Secret Service alerts the pilots. They go down into the reflecting pool, skim right in front of the Lincoln Memorial, come really close around the Washington Monument. Other helicopter thing bothered me though, because you mentioned coming in under the Key Bridge. It's not that big, and then second, going over to Chinatown. Chinatown is east of the White House, so you
They were going in a
presumably
really
they went through.
weird way.
It looked like K Street because you could see
Yeah,
the divided road, and so I'm like, you went through K Street, which means you would have passed the White House. You would have flown right over the White House, and now you're in Chinatown, which is the other side of the city. If this is a covert mission for them not to detect you, and you
they
try to
would have
land on the
already
move,
they would have already figured it
you
out.
gave them enough time from enough angles. You literally circled the White House and backtracked. So the CGI in the helicopter scenes, it was terrible. It was crummy. But once again, if you're looking at it, just a fun movie to spend an afternoon,
It
sure,
was cool. Yeah.
sure it worked.
One more thing I wanted to say that kind of worked to me that I feel like also plays heavily into what Vince does is this idea that the politicians are the villains, the ultimate villains, and in his cases, most time the politicians are the secondary villains. Although every now and then, which I think we're going to be getting to soon with the next couple of books, the politicians are the direct villains and the ones calling the shots, like that you might not necessarily see. And in this case, we get that twist at the end. I thought that the acting with the twist wasn't the greatest, but I appreciated the twist with the Speaker of the House being the bad guy. And as soon as I saw the beepers in the beginning of the movie, something clicked to me. I had forgotten that I had sort of remembered he was the bad guy, like halfway through the movie, because I'd obviously seen this before. But I wrote down on my little sheet of paper, I wrote beepers, question mark. And I'm like, who the hell is beepers? Like, what's up with that?
It was fun.
Let's say some things that we generally thought didn't work.
So if you remember me loving The Terrorist and Aziz, obviously not what they stand for, but I just loved how they were as characters and as a
Yeah.
cohort of these villains. This movie ruined it for me.
Yeah.
They did not get it right. It's a ragtag bunch of people. I'm like, oh, so there's this mercenary who's hired just for money, and he's ex Delta Force. Okay, he'd be really good at his job. And he's working with some Russian guy who has a very Russian name. I'm like, why is he on the team? Who is he? And then it turns out the ringleader is the director of the Secret Service who has fallen. And then they decide to randomly hire some hacker dude. So now we got this nerdy hacker guy.
Right.
And none of that
And
was
also
fitting together for
the
me.
white supremacist dude who holds down the hostages, like,
That's right. Who are you and how do you know these other people? And really, you just got hired as mercenaries for money to storm the White House? If you were smart about that, you would have said, hell no to that offer.
yeah.
And so I'm like, how'd you get this group together and why? And then in the end, the hacker guy, he played no other role but to make it more dramatic, saying, look, I'm able to download the government info and launch missiles for you. Well, he is the one who takes down the vice president in Air Force One
Right.
because he's able to hack the missile system. But these guys are not really together at all. And so, how do you end the story? And they just have the hacker blow himself up accidentally.
Yeah, I didn't.
What cheap way to get rid of a meaningless character?
That scene was weird when he's just like, "Uh-oh," like what they had
Out of
changed
nowhere.
the. How did that mess up? Like he did something wrong. They changed the code. Am I wrong? And they never explained like why his card would cause it to explode.
Nope. He just swiped the card of a bomb that he set up and explodes. You just had to get rid of him, right?
Yeah.
Like because he played no other role.
So I would agree with you that the cohort of villains was really bad. Maggie Gyllenhaal's character, who's like the deputy director of the presidential detail, she brings up this whole idea of the Matrix, which is like the top people that might pose a threat to the president on a daily basis. And I'm guessing that thing actually exists and probably shows up on the president's daily briefing or whatever. But come on,
That
you could
was
have
the
done
one.
better.
That was the one point where I almost bought into the terrorists. I was like, it's ragtag group. And then she goes, it's the Matrix. He's bringing together the top most wanted list of threats. But then I'm like, I don't have a good reason to understand why these guys are on the Secret Service top list of threats. Maybe an FBI most wanted,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Maybe a CIA, blacklist. But the Matrix was kind of cool. And I'm like, wait, but we don't know why these guys, how did they threaten the president? Why would they be on that list? And then they never talked about it again. So
Yeah.
another kind of letdown. Another big letdown. It really bothered me that the number one way we as the audience were expected to keep up with the plot developments was random background news reports.
Oh yeah.
And I'm okay if you do that in the beginning, right? Oh, we need a little more background about Jamie Foxx, the president's Middle East peace plan. Sure, have a speech on the news in the background or have him talking with his wife about this Middle East peace plan. Sure, set the stage. But then every step of the movie, how do we get information about what's going on? It's a news reporter doing a newscast.
Yep.
Oh, it seems like the terrorists have hostages. Oh, we have a Capitol police officer on the inside who's going to save the president. Oh, they're in an elevator shaft. It's just, and then at the very end, they kept it up to the very end. Oh, we have an airstrike coming in, and we're standing blocks from the White House.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that
there's an airstrike coming in, and there's a girl waving a flag on the South Lawn. Oh, it looks like they're going to call off the airstrike because she's waving a flag and they see it. I'm like, I don't need the freaking news to moderate and explain to me everything going on in the plot. And if I do need that, you wrote a really bad script.
yeah. First of all, the fact that the way more wider radius would have been cleared from the White House. The news is not getting that close. Second of all, when you talk about the airstrike, did you find it interesting that the pilot is actually the one that decides to call it off because obviously the Speaker of the House, who's the ultimate bad guy, doesn't want to call it off? Like, do you think that would actually happen?
I don't know enough, and just we have no military experience or background, but just as pure storytelling, I want to believe in that. That was
Yeah,
one moment where I was like,
I like that.
even though they're doing it in a very small way, they're playing with this idea of is it always justified to follow orders?
Right.
Even the most disciplined of a soldier, is there a threshold at which denying an order that they think is just wrong, or denying an order that is based on false intelligence? I love that idea of playing with that in storytelling because, I mean, that could have been the difference of going to Iraq or not, right?
It's
The
the whole
grunt.
plot of the movie, The Green Zone. You ever seen that
There
movie?
you go.
Yeah.
If the grunts are always just supposed to carry out the orders, what happens when the orders are wrong? So I was like, yeah, cool theme. But again, this movie plays with it for 5 seconds and an ending that I don't really care about anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. The two of the other big things I just wanted to bring up that didn't work: the casting of Channing Tatum as Kale, and the Capitol Police, and his like humor in his interview, and just everything with that whole plot was. I mean, obviously they had to figure out a way to get some guy who was going to help out the president, be this sort of tag team. And again, Channing does well when it's like an action comedy. I think like you think of like 21 Jump Street, James Wood, like the whole this turned Secret Service agent with he has cancer, his son died. Again, I if we were giving out the Dion Waiters Award, I thought he was way overacting in this movie. And then the scene with his wife was interesting, where she was just like, "Well, if you're doing it for Johnny, give him hell." Like,
Go ahead and do it.
yeah, like
Sell out your country.
yeah, that sort of that scene was like, all right, we didn't need that.
Let's get to it though. What is the relationship between this movie and Transfer of Power?
Yeah, unlike the last one, besides the fact that this is a movie about the White House and terrorists attacking it, I didn't see that many specifics parallels. Obviously, there's a guy who they run and in this case, Kale is already there in the White House when it gets taken. And the other one, Banning, sees it happening and then runs in. Neither of them are they're specifically sent in. I thought that, while there are comparisons where he's obviously talking to someone at the Pentagon. In both movies, you get these sort of conversations between the guy on the inside and the players on at the Pentagon. I didn't see that many parallels besides like again, the overarching principle.
I'll agree with you. I think White House Down, once I realized it was just going for over the top ridiculousness, it
Yeah,
didn't care really about being realistic. I really didn't feel like it took too much from Transfer of Power besides the White House gets taken by terrorists and there are these hostages. And it wasn't even just we made a few little changes and tweaks to get out of it. Like that was pretty sleazy by Olympus Has Fallen in some
yeah,
ways to
definitely.
make to try to hoodwink you and say we're not really doing Transfer of Power. We have our own movie, but it's so close. This one, I think they just blew it up and they just said we're doing our own thing. And
We're doing the most outlandish
yep.
shit ever. We're blowing up
Yeah.
everything, the pool, driving a limousine. We're
The
gonna get into
limos.
that.
Once I appreciated you're just going over the top, I didn't even think about Transfer of Power anymore. Except there was one part. I wonder if you caught this. It was so on the nose when he's about to launch the nukes and he's going to target Iran. And the fact that they lingered on this little detail for a couple of extra seconds makes me think there's intentionality here. Did you remember the first city that pops up on the map targeted by the nukes? And they leave it for a good 3 or 4 seconds.
Bandar Abbas.
Bandar Abbas, southern Iran. Why choose that city? The city where Rapp got Farah Harut. Scene one of Rapp ever. And I'm like, why else choose Bandar Abbas? I have no research on this city. Well, I mean, it's on the Strait of Hormuz, so it probably plays a central role in and out of the Persian Gulf, in the oil trade and
Right.
whatnot and military operations. But why choose that city as the first one you target? If you're going for, we want the audience to know we're targeting Iran, you make Tehran. You put Tehran really big right across the screen, right? You don't pick
Right.
Bandar Abbas.
Right. Yeah. One other small thing that just to when I was thinking about comparisons, I guess like the comparison with the vice president in when they do have the transfer of power, the invoking of the 25th Amendment, the vice president, while he's not like you don't really see the whole he's trying to be, although you do get it a little bit with the guy who had like a really bad balding, his chief of staff.
His chief of staff,
You could see that he's like smiling and like super giddy, and he's mouthing the words for the 25th Amendment, kind of like he was like hoping that this would happen.
He's like your
Uh,
Dallas King.
is Dallas King, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I thought that I had some comparisons between him and Vice President Baxter with the Vice President here. That was like a
I,
small little thing.
I could see that. I could see that. A little bit of a reverse, though, right? Because that vice president is saying, send the military in, bomb the White
Right,
House, let's get
right,
it over. Where Baxter was a bumbling fool saying, I don't want to send the military in because then I'll look bad when things go south.
right.
So, yeah, but they were both kind of those idiots.
Way different than like what Jamie Foxx's character or like Aaron Eckhart's character would be.
Or even President Hayes in Transfer of
Right,
Power, like very
right.
decisive, willing to trust the authorities, willing to go along with the intel.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap up with our winners and losers.
Nice.
Comparing White House Down, Olympus Has Fallen, and Transfer of Power. We have a couple of categories for you. And Chris, I want to hear from you, your take on these categories, and we'll see where we match up. So, who is the winner for our best villain out of these three stories?
I really, if so, are we choosing between the movies and also transfer of power, or all three of them together?
I think you're right. Transfer of power would win
Yeah, I think
almost
like
all the
if we were to
categories.
do all these categories, I'm
Yeah.
going to go transfer of power. But yeah, I'll give you sort of a little two for answer. So if we're just comparing the two movies, I'm definitely going to have to go with Kang, um, and his North Korean alliance. I thought that they were a better movie, even though we gave some sort of faults to their actions and what some of the demands that they wanted. I thought he was a better villain than the mercenaries, and it was very complex. Like eventually they wanted like the nuclear weapons and to, which was all just to get him money and to destroy the Middle East and to also get him president. Like that, White House Down just had a way more confusing like overall plot. But yeah, I'd have to go Aziz. Like, is better, is the best villain.
I'm with you. Aziz and the terrorists were definitely
Yeah,
the best gang of the bunch. But if you go movies, Kang in Olympus Has Fallen was pretty compelling and just great acting.
yeah,
All right,
and I
Chris.
think that that's the problem with movies that we can have. That, and again, that's what makes goes from a good movie to a great movie is you have such limited time with these people. You have 2.5, 3 hours maybe. Whereas a book you have, I don't know, it takes me 10 hours to read one of these Mitch Rapp books. You spend more time with the characters, and like you might spend a whole chapter just learning something about them, whereas we don't get that in movies,
But
or we don't
you
get that specifically in these movies.
you could still do it artfully though, and so that's
Right.
where the greatness and the skill comes in. And you can still do it in that limited time through a film. It's just you're going to get less background, so you have to authentically weave it in a way that works and hits home, but it can't be too on the nose. And both of these movies had far too many
Too
things
on the
just
nose.
straight up on the nose.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, best hero, and obviously, our boy Rapp is going to win every time. But let's talk movies. Yeah, Mike Bannon, or you have Channing Tatum's character.
John Cale. This is pretty easy for me. I think Mike Banning is a badass. I think Gerard Butler would be a great Mitch Rapp. Like, so I was kind of like finding a little bit of a hard time to delineate between the two. But yeah, I really like Banning in the movies.
You know, this next one though, best supporting cast. How do you feel that there was no Milt Adams in either of the movies? This sidekick for the main hero. It was totally this lone wolf hero going in. Which one had the better supporting cast? Knowing that in Transfer of Power, we loved Milt Adams and Irene Kennedy and Stansfield so much. Which movie pulled off a supporting cast better?
Yeah, I think you have to look definitely at like the players in the Pentagon and who was better. And you just have to go with Olympus Has Fallen. They just had better actors to fill those roles. And also, I think while I did appreciate Jamie Foxx's humor, he didn't play that great of a president for me. I thought Aaron Eckhart was just more presidential. But yeah, I really liked Morgan Freeman and Angela Bassett.
I agree with you. Nothing else to add there. The casting on Olympus Has Fallen is excellent. I almost wish that was the exact casting, as in some cases it was supposed to be for a Mitch Rapp series. All right. Best president. I know we talked in Transfer of Power of liking Hayes, very quick decision maker, trusting his personnel, trusting his military and intelligence officers. What do you think about President Asher, played by Aaron Eckhart in Olympus Has Fallen? And we've talked about it a bit, but Jamie Foxx as President Sawyer.
It's pretty badass for a president to do some of the things that Jamie Foxx did as Sawyer and really getting in the action. In the other sense, we had Asher who was taken as a victim, and he really showed his perseverance. And he's like, I thought it was cool. I was like, they're never get my code. And then like that was sort of like just diminished by the fact that they were able to break his code. Anyways, we hashed that out. But I would have to say, just purely on like who I thought was a more presidential figure, it had to be President Asher and Aaron Eckhart.
I'm with you. That was definitely more presidential. But if we talk entertaining, Jamie Foxx,
Oh
some
yeah,
of
Jamie
his
Foxx entertainment for
moving
sure.
through the White House, climbing elevator shafts, I think eventually shooting some people.
Yeah, and then he gets
Oh,
shot.
it was the pocket watch.
Oh, that's right. The pocket saved his life. Yeah, that's right.
His
That was pretty
wife gave
cool. That
him
was pretty cool.
Abraham
Lincoln's.
Lincoln's pocket watch, which saved his life and took the bullet. That was it. Pretty fun. Like that was cool.
So on like intense scenes, what was your favorite action scene?
I thought the limo on the South Lawn was kind of cool. It was just so
Over the
bombastic
top.
and unrealistic. And by that point, I was okay with the humor of White House Down because I've given up on it being a serious movie. Jamie Foxx brings out a missile launcher hanging out a window of the Beast, the presidential limo. We got a tank, blown up by an RPG on the roof. We've got that funny terrorist guy with the hostages. It was out of control. All this carnage and it's just that fun.
For me, I appreciated both helicopter scenes in both movies. I always enjoy a good helicopter scene. You have the one in Olympus Has Fallen where they're at night, they're coming in, and you have that like Hydra 6 intense machine gun that shoots them all down or all but one down. And then, we've already critiqued like the whole helicopters going through the city and how it's not plausible and stuff like that.
Well, you know who
Uh,
didn't make that mistake though with the helicopter scene, and I think the helicopter scene is better than both of these. Term limits. Vince Flynn.
yes, yeah,
I still like that scene.
that's the better version of the helicopter
The
scene
helicopter scene, yeah.
in White House Down. While I do think the opening scene or the White House tank down in Olympus Has Fallen is a little bit flawed, like it looked like I think on the writing on that giant airplane, what's that
The
airplane
C
called
one
again?
thirty, the
Yeah, the
gunship.
C-130. Yeah, I think it said Air Force, like United States Air Force. So
Really? Because that might help me though, because I'm wondering when you first see this gunship, it's going over the Chesapeake, and it's approaching DC, and the next shot is it over the Kennedy Center,
right,
and so that really made me think of like, are we really that lax? And so maybe if they hijacked this or stole it from an Air Force facility, then maybe it's more realistic for me. But
yeah,
the movie never told us that.
no. If you could have gone in a little more background to that, because I'm like, first of all, you let it
How'd
get
they get this gunship? Because then I'm wondering, when I first came to DC, I was shocked. I'm like, I always grew up thinking there's this restricted air zone, right? Like planes won't be anywhere near here now, especially in a post 9/11 world. And then I'm like, planes are flying over here all the time, and they're commercial jets coming in and out of Reagan National. You have just maybe a mile and a half west, planes flying over the Potomac River at very low altitude, landing at Reagan National. And so I'm like, I never knew that. So when I see a movie with a plane invading airspace, do we really intercept them that late? That shocked me.
that was interesting. Yeah,
Makes me wonder about the real life. And then Hydra, that gun on the White House, like, is that real?
is
Like,
that real?
do we have any anti-aircraft plans for the White House? Like, we must, right?
I hope so.
Because those F-16s, I think, scrambled out of Andrews, and they were like, we're 3 minutes out, 5 minutes out. I'm like, a gunship on the Kennedy Center is not going to be 3 minutes out from the White House.
Yeah, no.
So I'm like, I just hope we have more of a plan than that.
On that note, like, which movie did you think, or which story do you think is the most realistic out of all three?
So while you're right, the ground attack in Olympus Has Fallen to take the White House was super cool. It was
Yeah,
total carnage on the North Lawn. I thought that was cool, but most realistic and what scares me is what White House Down did.
right,
They had an AV crew who was fixing the sound system in
right,
the
right.
presidential movie theater, because obviously those guys are going to need heavy equipment, right? Big toolboxes. I'm sure they're scanned to some degree. But
Yeah,
like,
that.
what happens to construction workers and custodial staff and other repair people that need heavy equipment and
Yeah,
bring it into the White House?
like in the Capitol, it's the custodial worker who has a bomb, and like
Walker,
the one Capitol police officer like bumps into him and is like, "When did you guys walk through here? Like, wouldn't you normally just like be like, all right, that
turn it
kind of
around.
seems off, so I'm not just going to steal the napkin and walk away." I don't know. That was, but yeah, you're right. I think that's probably the most vulnerable area, and it's similar to transfer of power where you
He's
have these
already on the
you
inside.
have these vulnerabilities when you're on the inside, and so yeah, I'd say the most realistic to a certain point would be White House Down.
So there's one other thing that White House Down did with that AV crew is they weren't armed. When the first person comes in and is like, "We're crashing. You guys shouldn't be here," Stens kills him with a staple gun. I believe it
Right.
was a staple gun to the
And then he
chest,
gets it. Then he gets
and
his
they
gun.
pick up the weapon. Yep. And then White House Down did a deliberate job of showing the other terrorists behind Stens picking up guns of fallen Secret Service. So again, I think that kind of vulnerability from the inside and some sort of lax
Yeah, because you
protocols.
could imagine that like these construction workers are going to have something that could be used as a weapon. So
All right. Well, here's a question for you. Final thoughts. Did they rip off Vince Flynn? Because the Mercury News reported, quote, these movies owe Flynn big time. Do you agree?
I'd say yes, and I think I've hashed out the reasons why, but definitely Olympus Has Fallen. To me, seems like your sixth grader turning in a report of their buddies that they just changed a few words and we're going to call it good. I think they definitely owe Vince Flynn, and then obviously these movies were being developed at the same time. So how do these scripts both happen at the same time? They're fighting for the same actors. Yeah, they owe Vince a big deal. What about you, Mike?
I agree. They absolutely owe Vince. I would have really appreciated and think it would have gone a long way for some recognition. Even a cameo, right? Show a bookshelf with the Vince Flynn books on it and pan to it
Yeah,
for a few seconds.
that would have been cool.
Show Aaron Eckhart as president or Jamie Foxx as president, like just
Reading that book.
appreciating the craft. Make one of them a reader, sitting there with their feet up, reading a book. Have a nod to it at least. And so the fact that they didn't do that was like salt in the wounds. While at the same time, they didn't straight up steal the story.
True.
In some cases they changed minor details, which isn't fair, and they made a lot of money off of it without having a nod of respect or recognition for transfer of power. It soured the whole experience. It's tough, man.
Well, this was fun. I was glad we could
It's
do
fun.
this. What are we going to be covering next episode, Mike?
Our next episode, we will cover Vince Flynn's third book and the second book involving Mitch Rapp, The Third Option. So we'll be releasing our summary and review episodes, part 1 and 2 of The Third Option, early July. Also on Twitter, we will have our Third Option cover contest where you get to pick your favorite cover.
And then going forward, we're going to be changing it a little bit. In our lead up to Total Power, we want to jump off the publication order that we've been going with, and we're going to, instead for August, we're going to be reading and doing Lethal Agent as sort of a context, because in September Total Power will be coming out, and so just to have that continuation, we are going to be doing Lethal Agent. So
I'm excited for August and September, jumping to the newest in the Rapp series, getting to read some Kyle Mills, and we'll even have some bonus episodes all about Lethal Agent and the release of Total Power sprinkled in. So stick with us, and July is Third Option.
Yep. Please subscribe, rate, and review using your favorite podcasting platform. You can find us online at mitradpod.com or using our Twitter handle at mitradpod. And as always, just let Mitch be Mitch.
Guys, we're just simply two fans offering a discussion and reviews of some of our favorite books and characters. This podcast is not officially affiliated with Vince Flynn, Kyle Mills, or Simon & Schuster. But thank you to them for bringing us this wonderful world of Mitch Rapp.